Rosalind Parker's face stung with pain as she pressed a damp cloth against her swollen cheek, blood from her split lip staining the fabric crimson in the pale glow of dawn. The bruises were fresh, barely 12 hours old, and the mirror hanging crookedly on her bedroom wall reflected a woman she barely recognized, hollow-eyed, frightened, with marks of violence blooming across her skin like unwanted flowers. Wyoming Territory, 1878. The town of Hollow Creek had seemed like salvation 3 years ago when she'd married Thomas Parker, the wealthy cattle baron who'd promised her security, comfort, and respect. Now, at 22, Rosalind understood the bitter truth of that bargain. The golden cage was still a cage, and her husband's temper had grown more violent with each passing season. "You worthless little fool," Thomas had snarled last night, his whiskey breath hot against her face as his fist connected with her jaw. "Think I don't know about your secret meetings with the shopkeeper's wife? Planning to leave me, are you?" Rosalind hadn't been planning anything of the sort. She'd simply been helping Margaret Riley with reading lessons twice a week. But Thomas's jealousy and suspicion had twisted even this innocent friendship into something sinister in his mind. Now, in the quiet morning light filtering through lace curtains Thomas had imported from back east, Rosalind made her decision. 3 years of bruises, broken promises, and fear had hollowed her out. She couldn't survive another winter under his roof. With trembling hands, she packed a small valise, only what she could carry. A dress, undergarments, a photograph of her parents long deceased, the silver hairbrush that had belonged to her mother, and $43 she'd managed to hide away in the false bottom of her sewing box. It wasn't much to show for 3 years of marriage, but it would have to do. She waited until Thomas left for the cattle auction 2 towns over, knowing he wouldn't return until the following day. Then she slipped out through the kitchen door, heart pounding so loudly she was certain the housekeeper would hear it from the laundry room. The late September air held a bite that promised winter wasn't far behind. Rosalind pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and kept her head down as she walked briskly away from the grand house on the hill, past the church with its gleaming white steeple, and toward the stagecoach office at the edge of town. "Morning, Mrs. Parker," called Mr. Finley from his hardware store porch. She raised a hand in acknowledgement but didn't stop, didn't turn her face toward him, knowing the bruises would raise questions she couldn't answer. The stagecoach office was blessedly empty except for the ticket agent, a balding man who barely looked up from his ledger when she approached the counter. "When's the next coach leaving town?" she asked, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Noon stage to Riversbend," he replied. "Then connections west to Laramie if you're headed that way." "Riversbend will do," she said, sliding money across the counter. She'd never been there, but she'd heard it was growing, with new businesses opening as the railroad brought more settlers west. Perhaps there would be work for a woman who could read, write, and keep accounts. The agent finally looked up, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her face before he quickly composed his features. It was a look Rosalind knew well, the awkward recognition of abuse followed by the calculated decision to mind one's own business. "That'll be $3, he said, writing out a ticket. "Stage leaves at noon sharp from out front. Best be here by 11:30. Rosalind nodded her thanks and tucked the ticket into her handbag. She had 3 hours to wait, 3 hours during which Thomas's absence might be noticed, during which someone loyal to him might spot her and report back. She couldn't risk sitting in the depot or visiting any of the town's few establishments where she'd be recognized. Instead, she walked to the edge of town where a small creek meandered past a stand of cottonwoods. It was a peaceful spot, one she'd visited occasionally when Thomas allowed her to walk in town without an escort. She settled onto a flat rock, her valise beside her, and watched the water flow past, carrying leaves and twigs downstream toward some distant, unknown destination. The sound of approaching hoofbeats startled her from her reverie. Rosalind tensed, ready to flee into the trees, but relaxed slightly when she saw it was a stranger, a tall man atop a chestnut gelding, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He reined in his horse at the water's edge, evidently intending to let it drink. Rosalind gathered her things, preparing to leave, but the movement caught the rider's attention. He turned toward her, and she caught her first clear glimpse of his face, sun-weathered but handsome, with a strong jaw partially obscured by several days' growth of beard. His eyes were a striking blue that reminded her of summer skies. "Beg your pardon, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Didn't mean to disturb you." "You're not," she replied automatically, the polite response ingrained by years of social training. She kept her face partially turned away, hoping the shadow of her bonnet would hide the worst of her bruises, but the man was observant. His gaze sharpened as he took in her appearance, the valise at her side, and the tension in her posture. "You all right, madam?" he asked, his voice gentling as if speaking to a spooked horse. "I'm fine," Rosalind said, the words bitter with falsehood. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping a respectful distance but close enough now that Rosalind couldn't hide her injuries. His expression darkened when he saw her face, but not with the pity or discomfort she'd come to expect. Instead, a controlled anger flickered in his eyes, followed quickly by compassion. "Name's Samuel Reed," he said. "I've got water and some jerky if you're hungry." Rosalind hesitated. She'd been taught since childhood never to trust strange men, especially not in isolated locations. But something about his direct gaze and the careful way he kept space between them eased her wariness. "Rosalind Parker," she replied. "And thank you, but I'm not hungry." He nodded, not pressing the issue. "You waiting on someone, Mrs. Parker?" "The noon stage," she answered, then wondered why she'd volunteered the information. Samuel glanced at the position of the sun. "That's a fair wait. Mind if I water my horse and rest a spell?" She gestured to the creek bank. "It's not my land, Mr. Reed." A slight smile crossed his face as he led his horse to drink. "Just Samuel is fine, or Sam if you prefer." He watched the animal lap at the clear water for a moment before speaking again. "Headed somewhere in particular?" Rosalind hesitated. "River's Bend," she finally said, seeing no harm in sharing that much. Samuel nodded. "Good town, growing fast. I've got a small ranch about 10 miles outside it." "You're from River's Bend?" Rosalind asked, curiosity temporarily overcoming her caution. "For the past 5 years," he confirmed. "Came west after the war, looking for open country and a fresh start." He paused, then added, "Best decision I ever made." His words stirred something in Rosalind's chest, hope, perhaps, that new beginnings were possible. "Are you traveling there now?" she asked. "I am. Had business in Hollow Creek, but I'm headed home now." He hesitated, then said carefully, "Stage is mighty uncomfortable for a journey of any length. I'd be happy to offer you a ride in my wagon instead. It's parked at the livery stable in town." Rosalind stiffened. "I don't know you, Mr. Reed." "No, madam, you don't," he agreed easily. "And a lady has to be careful these days. Tell you what, I'll be at the livery until 11 if you change your mind. No pressure either way." He tipped his hat again, mounted his horse, and rode away before she could respond, leaving Rosalind to consider his offer. The next 2 hours passed slowly. Rosalind remained by the creek, periodically checking the path to ensure no one from town had come looking for her. As 11 o'clock approached, she made her decision and walked back into town, keeping to side streets until she reached the livery stable. Samuel was there, as promised, loading supplies into a sturdy wagon hitched to a pair of draft horses. He looked up as she approached, his expression neutral, allowing her the dignity of making her own choice without pressure. "The stage costs $3, Rosalind said without preamble. "I'll pay you the same for passage to River's Bend." Samuel shook his head. "I'm headed that way regardless, Mrs. Parker. Your company would be welcome, but I won't take your money." Rosalind frowned. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Reed." A small smile touched his lips. "How about a trade, then? I've got fresh bread and cheese for the journey. You could share that with me instead of paying." It was a small concession to her pride, and Rosalind found herself nodding agreement. "Very well." Samuel finished securing his supplies, then offered his hand to help her up to the wagon seat. Rosalind hesitated only briefly, before accepting his assistance, noting the calluses on his palm and the gentle strength in his grip. They left Hollow Creek without incident, the wagon rolling steadily along the rutted road that wound through rolling prairie dotted with stands of pine and aspen, beginning to turn golden with autumn. For the first hour, they rode in companionable silence, Rosalind gradually relaxing as the distance from town and Thomas increased. "Mind if I ask where you learned to handle horses, Mr. Reed?" she finally asked, watching as he confidently guided the team around a particularly muddy section of road. "My father raised horses in Virginia," he replied. "I grew up learning their ways, and please, it's Samuel." "Samuel," she repeated, testing the name. "Were you a cavalry man during the war?" He nodded. "Union cavalry, fought mostly in the Western theater." His expression grew distant. "Lost a lot of good men and horses both." "I'm sorry," Rosalind said softly. Samuel shrugged. "It was a long time ago now." He glanced at her. "What about you? You're not originally from Hollow Creek, I'd wager." "No," she confirmed. "I grew up in Missouri. My father was a school teacher." "That explains your fine speaking manner," Samuel observed. "You had proper schooling." Rosalind nodded. "My father believed girls should be educated the same as boys. He taught me literature, mathematics, even some Latin." "A progressive man," Samuel said approvingly. "Yes, he was," Rosalind agreed, a fond smile briefly lighting her face despite the pain from her split lip. "He and my mother died in a typhoid outbreak 5 years ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," Samuel said, genuine compassion in his voice. Rosalind acknowledged his sympathy with a slight nod. "With no family and few prospects, I accepted a marriage proposal from a man who visited our town on business." Her voice grew flat. "Thomas Parker seemed kind and prosperous. He promised me a good life in Wyoming." Samuel's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the reins, but his voice remained gentle when he spoke. "Those bruises suggest otherwise." Rosalind turned to face him directly for the first time, a challenge in her gaze. "Are you judging me, Mr. Reed, for staying as long as I did, for running now?" "No, madam," he said firmly. "I don't judge folks for doing what they must to survive." He paused, then added quietly, "And I don't judge them for choosing to stop merely surviving and start living instead." His words struck Rosalind like a physical blow, resonating with truth. For 3 years, she had been surviving, enduring Thomas's rages, healing from his violence, walking on eggshells to avoid provoking him. She had forgotten what it meant to truly live. "I don't know if I remember how," she whispered, the admission slipping out before she could stop it. Samuel's gaze was steady, compassionate, without pity. "You'll heal where love lives, Mrs. Parker. Might be love for a place or work that brings you joy or people who treat you with kindness. Might even be learning to love yourself again." He offered a small smile. "The bruises will fade. The fear takes longer, but that fades too in time." Rosalind studied him, wondering what experiences had given him such insight. You sound as if you speak from knowledge." A shadow passed over his features. "My sister," he said after a moment. "She married a man who treated her similarly. I helped her escape to California 10 years ago." His expression lightened. "She runs a successful millinery shop now, even got herself elected to the town council last year." Hope flickered in Rosalind's chest. "She built a new life." "She did," Samuel confirmed. "And you will too." They stopped at midday beside a small stream to rest the horses and eat. Samuel spread a clean blanket in the shade of a cottonwood and unpacked bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. Rosalind contributed the small flask of water she'd brought from Hollow Creek. As they ate, Samuel pointed out landmarks visible from their resting spot, a distant mountain range, the path of an old buffalo trail, a rock formation that resembled a sleeping giant according to local Indian legends. "You know this country well," Rosalind observed. "I've spent 5 years exploring it," he replied. "This territory gets in your blood. The open spaces, the changing seasons, the way the land challenges you but rewards hard work." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Even the winters, harsh as they are, have their own beauty." Rosalind had never thought of Wyoming's brutal winters as beautiful. To her, they had meant being trapped in the house with Thomas for months, isolated by snowdrifts and freezing temperatures with no escape from his moods. "I've never seen this land as you do," she admitted. "Perhaps you will," Samuel said, "when you're free to experience it on your own terms." They continued their journey after the brief rest, the wagon moving steadily across the rolling terrain. By late afternoon, Rosalind found herself sharing more of her story, how she'd come west as Thomas's bride, how his charming demeanor had changed once they were married, how the first blow had come 6 months into their marriage after she'd burned his dinner. "I should have left then," she said, regret coloring her words. "Easy to say in hindsight," Samuel replied without judgment. "Harder to do when you're alone in strange country with nowhere to go." "You understand," Rosalind said, surprised. "I've seen enough of life to know things are rarely simple," he answered. "Especially for a woman with limited options." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, bathing the landscape in golden light, Samuel pointed to a cluster of buildings visible in the distance. "River's Bend," he said. "We'll be there in about an hour." Rosalind nodded, anxiety suddenly churning in her stomach. She had no concrete plans beyond reaching the town, no connections, no guaranteed work or lodging. Samuel seemed to sense her unease. "There's a decent boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Holbrook. She's strict but fair. Would you like me to take you there?" "Yes, please," Rosalind said, relief evident in her voice. "I would appreciate that." The town of Riversbend proved larger than Hollow Creek, with a proper main street lined with businesses, a church, a schoolhouse, and several side streets of modest homes. A partially constructed railroad station at the town's edge testified to its growing importance. Samuel guided the wagon to a neat 2-story house with a sign reading Holbrook Boarding House, clean rooms, decent rates, Christian values. He helped Rosalind down from the wagon, then retrieved her valise. "Would you like me to come in with you?" he offered. "Mrs. Holbrook can be intimidating at first acquaintance." Rosalind hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." Mrs. Holbrook proved to be a formidable woman in her 50s with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun and piercing eyes that missed nothing. Her gaze immediately cataloged Rosalind's bruised face, simple dress, and single small valise. Then she looked at Samuel standing respectfully behind his new acquaintance. "Mr. Reed," Mrs. Holbrook acknowledged with a nod. "This lady is Mrs. Rosalind Parker," Samuel introduced. "Recently arrived from Hollow Creek and in need of lodging. I can vouch for her character." Mrs. Holbrook's expression softened marginally. I see. Well, Mrs. Parker, I do have a room available, $5 a week, meals included. No gentlemen callers in private rooms, no alcohol on the premises, and curfew is 9 o'clock sharp. That's acceptable, Rosalind said. Though I should tell you I only have enough funds for about a month's stay. I'll need to find employment quickly. Mrs. Holbrook assessed her again, more carefully. Can you read and write? Yes, very well, Rosalind answered. My father was a school teacher. I can also keep accounts and have experience with household management. The older woman nodded. The Mercantile is looking for a clerk who can manage their books. Pay isn't grand, but it's steady. I'll mention your name to Mr. Wilson tomorrow if you'd like. I would appreciate that very much, Rosalind said, hope rising in her chest. Then it's settled, Mrs. Holbrook declared. Dinner's at 6 sharp. I'll show you to your room now. Samuel cleared his throat. If you have no objections, Mrs. Holbrook, I'd like to call on Mrs. Parker tomorrow afternoon, perhaps show her around town a bit. The boarding house proprietress gave him a measuring look. 3 to 5 o'clock would be appropriate, in the parlor or for a walk in town, nowhere else. Samuel nodded, accepting the terms without argument. He turned to Rosalind. Until tomorrow, then, Mrs. Parker? Until tomorrow, Mr. Reid, she replied, surprised by how much she was looking forward to seeing him again. And thank you for everything. He tipped his hat and departed, leaving Rosalind to follow Mrs. Holbrook up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room at the back of the house. It contained a single bed with an iron frame, a washstand with pitcher and basin, a small dresser, and a hook on the wall for hanging clothes. Bathrooms at the end of the hall, Mrs. Holbrook explained. Hot water for bathing on Wednesdays and Saturdays only, unless you heat your own. I provide clean linens weekly. She paused, then added in a softer tone, Those bruises tell their own story, Mrs. Parker. You're not the first woman to arrive in such a state, and I doubt you'll be the last. Your business is your own, but you're safe here. Tears sprang unexpectedly to Rosalind's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Mrs. Holbrook nodded briskly. Rest now if you wish. Dinner bell rings at 6. Left alone, Rosalind sat on the edge of the narrow bed and allowed herself to breathe deeply for what felt like the first time in years. The room was small, the furnishings plain, but it was hers, a space where no one would strike her, where she could sleep without fear. The next few weeks passed in a blur of new experiences. True to her word, Mrs. Holbrook spoke to Mr. Wilson at the Mercantile, and Rosalind secured a position as a clerk and bookkeeper. The work was straightforward but satisfying, and Mr. Wilson proved to be a fair employer who valued her education and efficiency. Samuel called on her regularly, always observing Mrs. Holbrook's strict protocols. He showed Rosalind around Riverspend, introducing her to people he knew, helping her learn the rhythm of the growing town. On Sundays after church, he would take her for rides in his wagon, showing her beautiful spots in the surrounding countryside, a hidden waterfall, a meadow filled with wildflowers, a hilltop with views that stretched for miles. As October gave way to November, Rosalind found herself looking forward to these outings with increasing anticipation. Samuel was unfailingly respectful, never presuming or pushing beyond the boundaries of friendship. Yet she felt a growing connection between them that went beyond mere gratitude for his assistance. One crisp Sunday afternoon, they sat on a blanket atop a small rise overlooking a winding creek. The aspens had lost most of their golden leaves, and the first dusting of snow had fallen the previous night, quickly melting in the morning sun but leaving the air sharp and clean. Winter's coming, Samuel observed, gazing at the distant mountains now capped with white. First big snow usually hits before Thanksgiving. Rosalind nodded, pulling her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. The bruises on her face had healed completely now, though she sometimes felt phantom pain when memories of Thomas intruded unexpectedly. Mrs. Holbrook has been showing me how to knit, she said. Says I'll need warmer things than what I brought from Hollow Creek. Samuel smiled. She's right about that. Wyoming winters are no joke. He hesitated, then added, I've been meaning to ask you something, Rosalind. She looked at him, noting his use of her first name, a recent development he'd asked permission for just the previous week. What is it? She prompted when he remained silent. Are you concerned about your husband finding you? He asked directly. Rosalind tensed. It was a fear that haunted her quiet moments that Thomas would track her to Riversbend, would drag her back to Hollow Creek, would punish her for daring to leave. Yes, she admitted softly. I am. Samuel nodded, his expression serious. I've been making some inquiries. Discreetly, he added when she looked alarmed. Thomas Parker has apparently told people in Hollow Creek that you've gone to visit relatives back east. He seems more concerned with saving face than finding you. Relief washed over Rosalind, quickly followed by wariness. How do you know this? I have a friend who runs the general store in Hollow Creek, Samuel explained. I wrote to him, asking him to keep an ear out. He's trustworthy and didn't question why I was asking. Thank you, Rosalind said, touched by his thoughtfulness. That eases my mind considerably. There's something else, Samuel continued, his voice taking on a more hesitant quality. I've spoken with Judge Harmon about your situation. Without using your name, he hastened to add. He believes you have grounds for divorce, especially if you can document the abuse. Rosalind stared at him, a mixture of hope and disbelief rising within her. Divorce? Is that even possible? It's not common, Samuel acknowledged, but it is possible, especially in territories with more progressive laws. Wyoming's already talking about women's suffrage, did you know that? This territory might be the first to grant women the right to vote. I didn't know, Rosalind said, amazed by the possibility. The point is, Samuel continued, you have options. You don't have to live in fear of Thomas Parker for the rest of your life. Rosalind was quiet for a long moment, considering. The prospect of legal freedom from Thomas was tantalizing, yet frightening too. What if he contested it? What if he came to Riversbend in a rage, as if reading her thoughts? Samuel added gently, you wouldn't be alone through the process. You have friends here now, people who care about your welfare, people like you, Rosalind asked, meeting his gaze directly. Color touched Samuel's tan cheeks. Yes, he admitted. I care a great deal about your welfare, Rosalind. More than might be entirely proper, given your current circumstances. Her heart quickened at his near confession. Over the weeks of their growing friendship, Rosalind had come to admire Samuel deeply, his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, his gentle humor. She told herself it was merely gratitude and the natural bond between friends, but in honest moments, she recognized it was becoming something more. If I were free, she said carefully, would you speak differently about your feelings? Samuel held her gaze steadily. I would. But I won't pressure you or rush you, Rosalind. You've had enough of men making choices for you. His consideration only made her care for him more deeply. I'll think about the divorce, she promised. It's a big decision. Of course, he agreed. Take all the time you need. They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the landscape. Finally, Samuel stood and offered his hand to help Rosalind to her feet. We should head back before Mrs. Holbrook sends out a search party, he said with a smile. As they packed up the blanket and remaining food from their picnic, Rosalind made a decision. I'd like to speak with Judge Harmon, she said, about the divorce process. Would you arrange an introduction? Samuel's smile was warm with approval. I'd be honored to. The meeting with Judge Harmon took place the following week in his office above the bank. He was a grandfatherly man with spectacles and an impressive white beard who listened attentively as Rosalind described her marriage to Thomas Parker. The law permits divorce on grounds of cruelty, the judge explained when she had finished. Your testimony, combined with witnesses who can speak to the visible injuries you sustained, should be sufficient. He peered at her over his spectacles. Do you have documentation of any kind? Letters mentioning the abuse, perhaps, or a journal? Rosalind shook her head regretfully. I was afraid to write anything down. Thomas read all my correspondence. The judge nodded understandingly. Not unusual in these situations. Well, we can proceed with witness testimony. Mr. Reed tells me the stagecoach agent in Hollow Creek saw your bruises on the day you left. Yes, Rosalind confirmed, and Mrs. Holbrook saw them when I arrived here. Good. We'll take their statements. The judge made some notes. Now, Mrs. Parker, I must warn you that these proceedings can become contentious. Your husband will be notified and given a chance to respond. Are you prepared for that possibility? Fear flickered through Rosalind, but she squared her shoulders. I am. I can't build a new life while legally bound to Thomas. Very well, Judge Harmon said approvingly. I'll draw up the papers. The process will take several months, but if all goes smoothly, you could be legally free by spring. As they left the judge's office, Samuel offered Rosalind his arm. You were very brave in there, he said quietly. She attempted a smile. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. That's what makes it brave, he replied simply, doing what needs doing despite the fear. They walked in silence for a moment before Samuel spoke again. I have another proposition for you, Rosalind. A business proposition, he clarified quickly. Oh, she asked, curious. My ranch is doing well, he explained. Well enough that I've been thinking of expanding into breeding horses rather than just cattle. The problem is, I'm away too often to properly manage the books and correspondence such a venture would require. And you think I could help with that? Rosalind guessed. Samuel nodded. You're educated, organized, and Mr. Wilson speaks highly of your work at the Mercantile. I'd pay you fairly for your time, better than the store does, in fact. Rosalind considered the offer. How would it work? I'm not sure Mrs. Holbrook would approve of me traveling to your ranch regularly. No, that wouldn't be proper, Samuel agreed. I was thinking you could work from town. I'd bring the ledgers and correspondence to you weekly, and we could discuss business matters here in Rivers Bend. That could work, Rosalind said thoughtfully. Though I wouldn't want to leave Mr. Wilson short-handed. He's been very good to me. Perhaps you could work for him 3 days a week and for me too, Samuel suggested. That way you'd have both positions, and if one doesn't suit you, you wouldn't lose all your income. Rosalind was impressed by his consideration. You've thought this through. Samuel smiled. I try to consider all angles of a situation before proposing it. A valuable quality, Rosalind observed. Let me speak with Mr. Wilson, but tentatively, yes, I'd be interested in helping with your business ventures. Mr. Wilson proved understanding about Rosalind's desire to take on additional work. And by December, she had settled into a new routine, working at the Mercantile Monday through Wednesday, and on Samuel's horse breeding business Thursday and Friday. The arrangement provided her with enough income to continue boarding with Mrs. Holbrook and even save a small amount each week. As winter settled fully over Wyoming, bringing heavy snows and bitter cold, Rosalind found herself busier and more content than she had been in years. Her divorce proceedings had begun, with papers served to Thomas Parker in Hollow Creek. His response had been predictably angry, a blistering letter delivered to Judge Harmon denying all allegations and demanding Rosalind return to her rightful place in his home. The judge, unimpressed, had continued with the legal process. Christmas approached, bringing festive preparations to River's Bend. The mercantile was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and Mrs. Holbrook baked spiced cookies that filled the boarding house with delicious aromas. Samuel invited Rosalind to attend the town's Christmas social with him, an event held at the newly completed railroad station. "It's the social event of the season," he told her with a twinkle in his eye. "Such as it is in a frontier town." Rosalind accepted eagerly, then faced the dilemma of having nothing suitable to wear. Her best dress was the one she'd fled Hollow Creek in, now showing signs of wear from regular use. Mrs. Holbrook solved the problem by producing a length of deep green wool she'd been saving. "Used to be a dressmaker before I opened this place," she revealed to Rosalind's surprise. "Still got the knack if you'll let me help you." Together, they created a simple but elegant dress with a fitted bodice and full skirt. Trimmed with cream-colored lace at the collar and cuffs, it was the prettiest thing Rosalind had owned since leaving her husband. On the night of the social, Samuel arrived at the boarding house precisely at 6 o'clock, dressed in a clean black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. He stopped short when Rosalind descended the stairs in her new green dress, her hair arranged in soft curls around her face. "You look beautiful," he said simply, genuine admiration in his eyes. Rosalind felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you." Mrs. Holbrook helped with the dress. "You did well, Esther," Samuel said to the boarding house proprietress, who was watching from the doorway of her sitting room with poorly concealed approval. "Mind you have her back by 10, Mrs. Holbrook replied, though her stern tone was belied by the slight smile on her lips. "And keep her warm. Temperature's dropping fast out there." "Yes, madam," Samuel promised, helping Rosalind into a heavy woolen cloak before donning his own coat. The railroad station had been transformed for the occasion with evergreen garlands, paper stars, and dozens of candles casting a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band played traditional carols while townspeople of all ages mingled, enjoying punch and cookies provided by the ladies' auxiliary. Rosalind knew most of the attendees by now, having met them through her work at the mercantile or through Samuel's introductions. They greeted her warmly, treating her as one of their own rather than an outsider, a stark contrast to Hollow Creek, where she had always been viewed as Thomas Parker's property rather than an individual in her own right. As the evening progressed, Samuel led Rosalind to the area cleared for dancing. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Parker?" he asked formally, though his eyes were warm with affection. "You may, Mr. Reed," she replied, placing her hand in his. The band struck up a waltz and Samuel guided her smoothly around the floor. He was an excellent dancer, moving with the natural grace that characterized all his physical activities. "Where did you learn to waltz?" Rosalind asked, surprised by his proficiency. "My mother insisted all her children learn proper social graces," he explained with a smile. "Said just because we lived in the country didn't mean we had to be uncultured." "She sounds like a wise woman," Rosalind observed. "She was," Samuel agreed, a touch of old sadness in his voice. "She passed during the war pneumonia. My father followed a year later." "I'm sorry," Rosalind said softly. "It was a long time ago," Samuel replied, "but I think she would have liked you very much." The simple statement touched Rosalind deeply. "I would have liked to meet her." They danced twice more before taking a break for refreshments. As they sipped punch near one of the decorated windows, Samuel nodded toward the glass. "Look at that," he said. "Snow's really coming down now." Rosalind peered out at the swirling white. "It's beautiful," she said, "but I hope it doesn't make getting home difficult." "I brought the sleigh rather than the wagon," Samuel assured her. "We'll manage fine." As he predicted, the sleigh handled the accumulating snow with ease, the runners gliding smoothly over the white blanketed streets as they returned to Mrs. Holbrook's boarding house. Samuel had tucked heavy fur robes around Rosalind to keep her warm during the short journey. When they arrived, he helped her down from the sleigh and walked her to the front door. In the shelter of the porch, protected from the falling snow, they paused. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," Rosalind said sincerely. "I can't remember when I've enjoyed myself more." "The pleasure was mine," Samuel replied. He hesitated, then said, "Rosalind, I know your divorce isn't final yet, and I respect that. But I want you to know that when it is, I hope you'll allow me to court you properly." Her heart quickened at his words. "I would like that very much," she admitted. Joy lit his face. "That's the best Christmas gift I could receive." Impulsively, Rosalind rose on tiptoe and pressed a quick, chaste kiss to his cheek. "Merry Christmas, Samuel." His smile was radiant. "Merry Christmas, Rosalind." Winter deepened. January bringing temperatures cold enough to freeze the creek solid and snow that piled in drifts higher than a man's head. Despite the harsh conditions, life in Riversbend continued. The mercantile remained open, the stagecoach made its weekly run when weather permitted, and Samuel's horse breeding business began to take shape with Rosalind's organized assistance. In February, unexpected news arrived from Hollow Creek. Judge Harmon summoned Rosalind to his office one bitterly cold afternoon, his expression grave as she took a seat across from his desk. "I've received word about Thomas Parker," he said without preamble. "It seems he was caught in last week's blizzard while checking on a remote section of his ranch. His body was found yesterday by one of his hands." Rosalind sat very still, a complex wave of emotions washing over her: shock, relief, guilt, and an odd sense of emptiness. "I'm sorry to deliver such news," the judge continued, watching her carefully. "I know it must come as a shock despite your circumstances." "Thank you for telling me," Rosalind managed. I don't know what to say." "There's nothing that needs saying," Judge Harmon assured her, "but you should know that his death changes your legal situation. The divorce proceedings are now moot, of course. Instead, you are his widow and likely his heir, depending on the terms of his will." The thought of inheriting Thomas's property, the house where she had suffered, the wealth that had kept her trapped, made Rosalind feel slightly ill. "I don't want his money," she said firmly. Judge Harmon nodded understandingly. "You might feel differently once the shock wears off. In any case, there will be legal matters to attend to. I've taken the liberty of writing to the county clerk in Hollow Creek to request copies of the relevant documents." "Thank you," Rosalind said again, feeling numb. "Is there anything I need to do now?" "Not at present. I'll contact you when we receive the papers from Hollow Creek." The judge paused. "Mrs. Parker, I hope you'll speak with someone about this news. A sudden death, even of someone who treated you poorly, can be difficult to process alone." Rosalind nodded and took her leave, walking through the snowy streets in a daze. Without conscious decision, her feet carried her to the mercantile. Samuel was there, discussing an order with Mr. Wilson. One look at Rosalind's face had him excusing himself and coming to her side. "What's happened?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Thomas is dead," she said simply. "Caught in the blizzard last week." Samuel's eyes widened slightly, but he asked no questions, merely offered his arm. "Let me take you somewhere quiet where we can talk." They ended up at the small cafe next to the hotel, seated in a corner booth with cups of hot coffee before them. Samuel listened attentively as Rosalind related what Judge Harmon had told her, including the matter of Thomas's will. "How do you feel about it?" he asked when she had finished. Rosalind stared into her coffee cup. Confused, she admitted. I hated what he did to me, but I never wished him dead. And now I feel guilty for the relief I feel, knowing he can never hurt me again. That's natural, Samuel assured her. Your feelings don't have to make perfect sense right now. The judge says I might inherit his property, Rosalind continued. I don't want it, Samuel. I don't want anything that was his. You don't have to decide anything immediately, he said gently. Give yourself time to think clearly. She nodded, grateful for his steadying presence. Thank you for listening. Samuel reached across the table and briefly covered her hand with his. Always. In the weeks that followed, Rosalind gradually adjusted to her new reality. Thomas Parker was gone, and with him the fear that had lingered in the back of her mind even after months in Riversbend. She was free legally and completely free to build whatever life she chose. March brought the first hints of spring, patches of ground appearing as the snow receded. With the improved weather came documents from Hollow Creek, delivered to Judge Harmon's office and promptly shared with Rosalind. Thomas had indeed left everything to her: the ranch, the house in town, his business interests, and considerable savings in banks both in Wyoming and back east. It's a substantial inheritance, the judge told her. You're a wealthy woman now, Mrs. Parker. Rosalind shook her head, still unable to fully process the idea. What am I supposed to do with a cattle ranch? You could sell it, Judge Harmon suggested. There would be buyers eager for such prime grazing land. Perhaps, Rosalind said thoughtfully. I'll need to think about it. That evening, she discussed the inheritance with Samuel during their now regular Friday evening walks through town. The sunset painted the western sky in shades of pink and gold as they strolled along the boardwalk, nodding to acquaintances they passed. If I sold the ranch, Rosalind mused, I could invest the money, perhaps in a business here in Riversbend. What kind of business would interest you? Samuel asked. Rosalind considered the question. I've always loved books. Riversbend doesn't have a proper bookshop. People have to order through the mercantile catalog. A bookshop would do well here, Samuel agreed. Especially with the railroad bringing more settlers. People want education for their children and entertainment for themselves during the long winters. It could have a reading room, Rosalind continued, warming to the idea, with newspapers and magazines from back east, and perhaps a small lending library for those who can't afford to buy books outright. Samuel smiled at her enthusiasm. You've given this some thought. Not until this moment, she admitted with a laugh. But now that I'm considering it, I find I quite like the idea. Then you should pursue it, he encouraged. You have the means now and the freedom to choose your own path. Rosalind nodded, feeling a growing excitement about the possibility. I'll need to go to Hollow Creek, she said, sobering slightly, to settle Thomas's affairs and arrange the sale of the property. Would you like company for that journey? Samuel offered. It might be difficult to face those memories alone. Gratitude washed over Rosalind. I would appreciate that more than I can say. They planned the trip for early April when the roads would be passable, but before the heavy spring rains made travel difficult. Mrs. Holbrook, informed of their intentions, insisted on propriety. You'll need a chaperone, she declared firmly. I can't have my respectable boarding house associated with impropriety. Of course, Mrs. Holbrook, Rosalind agreed quickly. Perhaps you would consider accompanying us, all expenses paid naturally. The older woman blinked in surprise at the invitation, then nodded with satisfaction. That would be acceptable. I haven't been further than Laramie in 15 years. The journey to Hollow Creek took 2 days by stagecoach, with an overnight stay at a roadside inn where Mrs. Holbrook insisted on sharing a room with Rosalind, while Samuel took separate accommodations down the hall. As they neared the town, Rosalind grew increasingly quiet, memories of her life there pressing in on her. Samuel, seated beside her in the coach, noticed her tension. "We don't have to stay any longer than necessary," he said quietly. "Just long enough to handle the legal matters." Rosalind nodded gratefully. "I've arranged for us to stay at the hotel rather than at the house. I don't think I could bear to sleep there again." Hollow Creek looked smaller than Rosalind remembered, the main street narrower, the buildings less impressive. Thomas's house on the hill, once so intimidating, seemed diminished, somehow still grand by local standards, but lacking the power it had once held over her imagination. The next 3 days passed in a blur of meetings with the local banker, Thomas's foreman who'd been running the ranch since his death, and potential buyers for both the ranch and town house. Throughout it all, Samuel remained at her side, offering quiet support and occasional business advice when asked. On their final evening in Hollow Creek, after signing papers to sell the ranch to a cattle company from Denver and the house to a doctor newly arrived from Pennsylvania, Rosalind stood on the hotel porch watching the sunset. "Penny for your thoughts," Samuel said, joining her with Mrs. Holbrook's blessing as they were in full view of the street. "I was thinking about how different everything looks to me now," Rosalind replied. "This town seemed so permanent, so fixed. Thomas seemed invincible. Now I see it was all just temporary, changeable." "Most things are," Samuel observed. "For better or worse." "For better in this case," Rosalind said firmly. "I'm ready to leave tomorrow, ready to start building something that's truly mine." Samuel nodded. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding a bookshop in Riverspend. There's a vacant storefront next to the cafe that might suit your purposes. 2 stories with living quarters above the shop." Rosalind turned to him, surprised. "Living quarters? You think I should move out of Mrs. Holbrook's?" "Eventually," he said carefully, "when it's appropriate." Something in his tone caught her attention. "Samuel, what are you not saying?" He took a deep breath. "I had planned to wait until we were back in Riverspend, but perhaps this is the right moment after all." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Rosalind Parker, these past months have shown me what a remarkable woman you are, strong, intelligent, kind despite all you've endured. I find myself hoping you might consider becoming my wife when you're ready." Rosalind stared at the box, then at Samuel's face, earnest, hopeful, but also patient. "You're proposing?" "I'm asking if you might consider the possibility," he clarified. "I don't expect an immediate answer. You've been through significant changes, and you deserve time to establish your independence before considering marriage again." Tears pricked at Rosalind's eyes, not of sorrow but of deep emotion. "May I see the ring?" Samuel opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to her when they became engaged, blue, like the Wyoming sky." Rosalind touched the ring gently. "It's beautiful." She looked up at Samuel, studying his face, the face of a man who had shown her nothing but kindness, respect, and genuine care since the day they met by the creek. "I don't need more time," she said softly. "My answer is yes." Joy transformed Samuel's features. "Truly, truly," she confirmed. "I've learned to trust my heart again, Samuel, and it belongs to you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I promise to honor your trust every day of our lives together." "I know you will," Rosalind said with certainty. Then, glancing toward the hotel entrance, she added with a smile, "We should probably tell Mrs. Holbrook before someone else does." Samuel laughed. "Indeed. Though I suspect she's been expecting this announcement for some time." Mrs. Holbrook received the news with a satisfaction that confirmed Samuel's suspicion. "About time," she declared. I was beginning to think Mr. Reed would never work up the courage. You approve, then? Rosalind asked, somehow still seeking the older woman's blessing. Mrs. Holbrook's stern features softened. My dear, I've watched you heal and grow stronger these past months, and I've known Samuel Reed for 5 years as a man of integrity. Yes, I approve, though I'll expect a proper wedding with all the trimmings. Of course, Samuel agreed immediately. Would June be too soon? That would give Rosalind time to establish her bookshop and settle her affairs. June would be perfect, Rosalind said, already envisioning their future together. They returned to Riversbend 3 days later, Rosalind now officially engaged and considerably wealthier from the sale of Thomas's properties. News of their engagement spread quickly through the small town, met with general approval and congratulations. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Rosalind purchased the vacant storefront Samuel had mentioned, hired carpenters to renovate the space according to her specifications, and ordered an initial inventory of books from publishers in New York, Boston, and Chicago. She chose a name, Prairie Sky Books and Reading Room, and commissioned a painted sign featuring an open book against a blue background. By early June, the shop was ready for its grand opening, scheduled for the week before her wedding to Samuel. The lower floor held bookshelves along the walls, comfortable chairs for reading, and a small counter where Rosalind would handle sales and special orders. The upper floor had been transformed into a cozy apartment with a parlor, kitchen, bedroom, and small study. The day before the shop's opening, Rosalind stood in the center of the main room, surveying her creation with pride. The shelves were filled with carefully selected volumes, classics of literature, practical guides to farming and ranching, children's books, and popular novels. A rack near the window held newspapers and magazines from across the country, while a notice board advertised the lending library program she'd established. It's perfect, Samuel said from the doorway, having arrived to escort her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, a weekly tradition they'd established during their courtship. Rosalind turned to him with a radiant smile. Do you really think people will come? I know they will, he assured her. You've created something this town has needed for a long time, not just books, but a place where ideas can be shared. She crossed the room to take his offered arm. I couldn't have done it without you. That's not true, Samuel corrected gently. You had the vision and the courage to make it reality. I just offered occasional advice. And constant support, Rosalind added. And love. Samuel smiled down at her. That part was easy. The shop's opening the next day exceeded Rosalind's most optimistic expectations. It seemed everyone in Riversbend found a reason to visit. From the schoolteacher, eager to supplement her limited classroom library, to ranchers looking for agricultural references, to children wide-eyed at the colorful picture books. By closing time, Rosalind had sold more than 30 books and signed up 15 families for the lending library. A successful first day, Samuel observed as he helped her close up. Beyond successful, Rosalind agreed happily. I've already had requests for titles to order, and Mrs. Tilson from the Women's Club wants to discuss hosting their monthly literary discussions here. You've created more than a store, Samuel said proudly. You've created a gathering place. 5 days later, on a perfect June morning with clear blue skies and wildflowers in bloom across the prairie, Rosalind Parker became Rosalind Reed in a ceremony at Riversbend's small church. She wore a cream-colored dress with lace trim and carried a bouquet of blue and white wildflowers gathered by Mrs. Holbrook that morning. Samuel, resplendent in a new black suit, waited for her at the altar with an expression of such joy that it brought tears to the eyes of several attendees. The reception was held in the town square, where tables had been set up under a canopy of strings decorated with paper flowers and ribbons. Nearly everyone in Riversbend attended, bringing dishes to share in the tradition of frontier celebrations. There was music from the same band that had played at the Christmas social, and dancing that continued until the sun began to set. As twilight descended, Samuel led Rosalind to his waiting wagon, now decorated with ribbons and a hand-lettered sign reading "Just Married" attached to the back. Their destination was Samuel's ranch, their ranch now 10 miles outside of town. Rosalind would maintain her apartment above the bookshop for days when business kept her in town late, but the ranch would be their primary home. The property came into view as they crested a small rise, a neat house of weathered wood with a broad porch, a large barn, corrals for horses, and outbuildings for ranch operations. In the fading light, windows glowed with welcoming warmth, lamps having been lit by Samuel's foreman in preparation for their arrival. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reid," Samuel said softly as he helped her down from the wagon. Rosalind took in the scene before her, the house, the land stretching around them, the mountains in the distance painted purple by the sunset. Then she looked at Samuel, his face full of love and promise in the gathering dusk. "Home," she repeated, the word rich with meaning. She reached up to touch his cheek, remembering their first meeting by the creek when he had seen her bruises and spoken words that had given her hope. "You were right, you know." "About what?" he asked, covering her hand with his own. "About healing where love lives," Rosalind said. "I found that place with you." Samuel drew her close, his arms strong and gentle around her. "And I with you," he murmured before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that sealed their beginning not as a frightened woman and her rescuer, but as equal partners in the life they would build together under the vast Wyoming sky. 1 year later, Rosalind stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Samuel demonstrated to their foreman's young son how to properly brush down a yearling colt. Her hand rested lightly on her rounded belly, where their first child had been growing for the past 6 months. Prairie Sky Books was thriving under the day-to-day management of Margaret Wilson, the merchant's daughter who had proven to have a gift for business. Rosalind still spent 3 days a week there, overseeing operations and hosting reading circles for both children and adults, but her focus had gradually shifted to the ranch and the family she and Samuel were creating. The horse breeding business had grown steadily, with their first crop of foals now attracting buyers from as far away as Denver and Salt Lake City. Samuel's knowledge of bloodlines combined with Rosalind's head for business had proven to be a successful partnership in more ways than one. As the evening shadows lengthened across the yard, Samuel finished his lesson and sent the boy home with his father. He crossed to the porch, taking the steps 2 at a time to join Rosalind. "How are you feeling?" he asked, gently placing his hand beside hers on her belly. "Wonderful," she answered truthfully. "Dr. Miller says everything is progressing perfectly." Samuel smiled, the same smile that still made her heart quicken after more than a year of marriage. "Have you decided on names yet? You promised to tell me your thoughts today." Rosalind leaned into his embrace. "If it's a boy, I thought perhaps William after your father, and if it's a girl, Elizabeth after my mother." "Perfect names for a perfect child," Samuel approved, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though with you as a mother, how could our child be anything but perfect? You're biased," Rosalind laughed, turning in his arms to face him fully. "Completely," he agreed without hesitation, "and happily so." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above their home, Rosalind reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a frightened, bruised woman fleeing abuse to a confident business owner, beloved wife, and soon-to-be mother. The scars from her previous life had faded, though they would never completely disappear. They were part of her story, reminders of what she had overcome, but they no longer defined her. What defined her now was the love she shared with Samuel, the love they would give their child, the love she had rediscovered for herself. Just as Samuel had promised on that first day by the creek, she had healed where love lived. And in that healing, she had found not just safety, but joy deep, abiding joy that suffused every aspect of her new life. As Samuel's arms tightened around her, Rosalind sent a silent prayer of gratitude into the vast Wyoming night for the journey that had led her home.